conditioning and classical conditioning. I wanted to go over the little Albert exam a little bit better. One of the questions you might be asked is, why did little Albert cry? This could have been a quiz question today or something you might find on an exam someday. Why did little Albert cry when he was presented with a monkey or a man in a Santa Claus mask or a white dog, white furry dog? And you should be able to identify the conditioned stimulus. What was the conditioned stimulus in little Albert's story? Why did he cry? What was the unconditioned stimulus that makes little Albert cry? A loud noise. So the unconditioned stimulus was a loud noise. And what was the conditioned stimulus? What did they pair that with?
White rat.
Or a rabbit. I forget now if it's a rabbit or a white rat, but I think it was a rabbit. A white furry rabbit. Initially, they could present him with a monkey or a rabbit or a white rat or a cat or a dog or a Santa Claus mask, and he didn't cry. So he didn't initially. It's conditioned, but after they paired the loud noise, they showed the animal, then they banged the gong, the animal, then the gong. What happened? Eventually, the white rabbit elicited crying. This was the unconditioned response, because he cried. And the white rabbit, now that's the conditioned stimulus, generates a conditioned response, which was crying. All right, so that was the story. But then why did he respond to the man in the white Santa Claus mask or a white dog? And that's called stimulus generalization. A conditioned stimulus that's similar to it. So now we have another conditioned stimulus. I'll call it conditioned stimulus 1 here to distinguish it from CS without a label on it. Was equal to a white dog, let's say, or some other white furry animal. Actually, any, if I remember right, the monkey wasn't white. So other furry animals, present him with a furry animal, and he cried in response to the furry animal. And that's called stimulus generalization. So it didn't need to be the same as the stimulus that was paired with the noise, but something similar to it also generated crying response. When you condition a baby to, and by a baby I guess I'll say an infant, to giggle, when you tickle a baby, what is the conditioned stimulus? All right, what's the unconditioned stimulus? What generates giggling in a baby? Tickling, right? So you tickle the baby and baby giggles. And then you wiggle your finger like you're going to tickle them, and then you tickle them. And you wiggle your finger like you're going to tickle them, and you tickle them. And you wiggle your finger like you're going to tickle them, and you tickle them. And then all you have to do is wiggle your finger, and then what happens? The baby giggles. This is classical conditioning, all right? A whole lot of videos, if you go to YouTube, you'll find all kind of stuff. Students that take, they decide to work with their siblings, with their little brother and sister. So there's a whole lot of conditioning of giggling by babies, and one girl decided to get her sister by coughing and then giggling, tickling. So she conditioned her baby sister to giggle in response to her coughing. So she would go, and then she would tickle, and then she would tickle. And then all she had to do was go cough, and the little girl would giggle. So that's classical conditioning. What does Fraser decide he's going to do? He wants to get even with a guy who pulled a prank on him. Now, sad thing is, Fraser's a psychiatrist and should know better. But the guy pulled a prank on him, so he's going to get even with him. And he knows there's an unconditioned stimulus that'll make his friend unhappy, or his nemesis unhappy, his rival unhappy. The guy's a Seahawks fan. This is before the latest Super Bowl, so I guess it's unrelated to that, right? So Fraser's an old show. The guy's a Seahawks fan, so when the Seahawks lose, he's unhappy. So he wants the guy to be unhappy. So what's his plan? When the Seahawks lose, he's going to put a red balloon on his car. And pretty soon, the sight of this red balloon is going to make his friend unhappy. So we'll be able to make this friend unhappy with the red. What's wrong with it? Which comes first? The Seahawks losing or the red balloon? The Seahawks losing. So what comes first? The unconditioned stimulus or the conditioned stimulus, right? So what's the problem with this? What do you call this paradigm? You guys aren't ready for the test today. What's this paradigm called? CS should precede the unconditioned stimulus, right? Best is if it's a half second before. What's he planning to do? Present the unconditioned stimulus. As a matter of fact, he can't control the unconditioned stimulus. It's just going to happen, right? So when Seahawks lose, he's going to put the red balloon. It's called backward conditioning, and it doesn't work. That's the thing to remember about it, backward conditioning. All right? So view the video. Having taken intro psych at least once you've studied it, you should be able to recognize these problems that the people have. All right, so here's where we were last time. We had the rat in the Skinner box. All this equipment back here, this is all replaced by computers that can be put, you know, on the head of a pin. This is old-fashioned computer equipment with wires and relays and things. But this part right here is still pretty much the same. We've got a rat on a grid, and there's a tray here that you can pull out that has sawdust or chewed up paper that's in there. So when the rat pees, it'll fall in there, and you can clean up quickly. Here's the lever. There's food that can be released into a tray so that the rat can be reinforced. Here's B.S. Skinner off the picture there. And we train the rat using a primary reinforcer, food, and a secondary reinforcer, the click. So I'm going to go through shaping again with you. This time we're going to train your dog to turn circles. This is one you can train a rat to do too. So when I took that undergrad lab that they apparently don't require everybody to take at Berkeley. I think I was at UCLA. They didn't require us to take that lab at UCLA either. You had your choice. You could take that or the physiological lab, or I mean, you had some choices. But I took that one with the rat. My little rat also trained it. You were allowed to adopt your rat afterward. I don't know if they let you do that here. Maybe depend on the instructor. So rather than have your rat just go back to wherever the rats go after they're done with them in the semester, you could adopt it and give it a home for as long as rats live. So mine was adopted. I taught it a number of tricks, including this one, which you can teach your dog. So how many have a dog? So a number of you have dogs, so you may have worked with dogs. So you got the dog. Dog hasn't been fed for a while, so it's meal time. Dog is, Skinner might use the word hungry, but he uses an operational definition. What's the operational definition of hungry for him? He means that the food is been deprived of food for 24 hours with no access to food. That he can manipulate and measure. So that's observable. That's Skinner's operational definition. So when you saw in the video, we've got a hungry pigeon here in the video that, the Zimbardo video from Discovering Psychology. When you meant hungry pigeon, all he means by it is the pigeon hasn't been fed for 24 hours. So that's all he means by hungry. All right. So we have a dog that hasn't been fed for a while. It's mealtime for this dog. You are going to have a clicker, and we're going to use a clicker as a secondary reinforcement. So food is going to be the primary reinforcer. And the food should be cut up into small pieces, because otherwise you're not going to be able to get very many trials. You're not going to be able to get a lot of practice in with your dog. If you give him a whole steak, the dog will grab the steak and go off and eat it. And you'll have to wait till tomorrow to do one more trial. But you keep working with the dog if you've got a dog that hasn't been fed with small pellets of food. So you take something like bologna and cut it up into little pieces, or the treats that they sell at Trader Joe's, for example, that you can cut up. They come made of chicken or made of beef liver or various other ingredients. Cut them into small little pieces. So a small pellet of food is going to be your primary reinforcer, and you're going to use a clicker as the secondary reinforcer. So the dog is out there, you've got some treats, you've got a clicker, and the first thing you're going to do is cause the click to become a secondary reinforcer by pairing it with the food. So when the dog is going about its business, doing various things, you make sure it's not doing anything negative. You go click and offer it the pellet of food. Pretty soon the dog is going to come immediately when you make that click. Where do you get a clicker? Well, they sell these as toys for kids. It's called a cricket, a little piece of metal that you push in, it goes click, click. They also sell them at Petco as a dog clicker that basically has a button on it. You push the button, it goes click, makes a click, so that the sound becomes a secondary reinforcer. So the dog is doing its thing, and at some point, when it's doing positive things, you go click and offer it the food. The dog soon is going to associate the click with the fact that food is paired. And so the first part of shaping is we establish the click as a secondary reinforcer. Why do we have a secondary reinforcer? This is so that you can immediately reinforce the animal before it has to come walking over and take the food. So soon the click itself becomes reinforcing and strengthens the behavior of the dog. And you can make that click happen immediately after the dog has done what it is you wanted it to do. So we're trying to get the dog, we're going to want to train the dog to turn circles clockwise as seen from above. So that'll be our goal for this little exercise of shaping. So the first thing is we have a number of trials in which we present the click and then present the food. So the secondary reinforcer becomes the conditions, you can think of this as a conditioned stimulus that becomes a secondary reinforcer because it predicts food. Pavlov would say the dog begins to salivate when you make the click, right? But the click is also becoming reinforcing because it's paired with food in this case. All right? So now the next thing we do is we wait for the dog. In order for the dog to turn clockwise as seen from above, it needs to face you. And if you've been clicking and feeding, the dog is going to do various things. It may jump up on you. Don't feed it when it jumps up on you. It may bite your foot. Don't feed it if it bites your foot. It may bark. Don't bite it. Don't feed it if it barks. Because basically you're going to train your dog to do undesirable behaviors. Where do undesirable behaviors come from, according to behaviorists? You have trained your dog to do these behaviors by reinforcing inappropriate behavior. Cesar Millan has to deal with behavior problems, basically mental illnesses in the dogs, created by humans. So he talks about it as training humans to get along with their dogs rather than training the dog. He doesn't call himself a dog trainer anymore. He rehabilitates humans, gets them to correct their behavior toward their dog so the dog will exhibit the behavior you want. So don't reinforce the dog. So, oh, the dog bites you. Oh, there you go, good boy, I'm being nice to you now. You're training the dog to bite you. You don't feed it when it bites, right? You don't say, oh, I'll be nice to you, you should be nice to me. That's human thinking. I will do this for you if you will do that. Dog doesn't understand the language if you say all that to them. The dog understands. I bit him and got fed. I'll bite him again. Try that, see if that works again, right? So the dog is there facing you. If the dog turns to the right, click, feed. Dog turns to the right a little more, click, feed. Wait for the dog to turn to the right, click, feed. So you're getting successive. Pretty soon you make the dog turn almost all the way around. Finally you wait till it turns all the way around. Now you train the dog to turn circles. So that's shaping up. It's called reinforcing a successive series of approximations to the behavior that you want. And if you want the rabbit to pick up a coin and put it in a bank, you're going to have to train it first to go to the coin and reinforce it for approaching the coin, and then for touching the coin, and for picking up the coin, then for picking up the coin and carrying it toward the bank, then for picking it up and carrying it toward the bank and touching the bank with it, then for picking it up and carrying it to the bank and putting it in the bank. So you want to create a sequence of behaviors you've got to reinforce. You'll find all kinds of videos containing false information and real information. A lot of people have trained dogs and rats and cats to do all sorts of fantastic things. You can find a lot of videos of real things that people have trained the dogs to do. So this is called shaping the behavior of the dog. This is a positive reinforcer because presenting food, it's a primary reinforcer because you don't need to train the dog for food to become reinforcing. But the click is called the secondary reinforcer because the click is not initially reinforcing. If you just started off with a clicker and waited for your dog to turn and you go click, the dog is going to alert its ears and look at you when you make the click, but it doesn't strengthen its behavior. But if the click has been paired with food, the click itself becomes reinforcing. And you can reinforce the dog now without even presenting food on every occasion, simply the click alone. What else works? What's a famous secondary reinforcer for humans? What's that? Thought I heard somebody say, what? Money, right? Because initially money isn't really valuable, but pretty soon it's not food or sex or things that are primary reinforcers, but you can get those things with it, right? So with money you can buy food. So money is paired. What's another with children? What's a very big reinforcer with children? Thought I heard somebody say something.
Praise.
Praise, yes, praise is paired with doing a good job, right, for the children. And for school kids, grades, right, grades. Who cares if it's an A or a B or an F? These are just letters, right? But eventually they become paired with consequences from the parents and so on. You know, money or praise or other, maybe they're tertiary reinforcements, right? So tertiary is something that you could then try pairing something with a click and see if that becomes reinforcing, and indeed that's called a tertiary reinforcer, if it's paired that way. You can also use a voice to praise the dog. So if you don't have a clicker, you could say, good girl, good boy, or have some kind of distinctive sound, because the dogs don't understand English or other languages really. But if you have a distinctive sound that's made, that's paired with the food, you know, and so the guys working in Afghanistan with the dogs that walk the perimeter around the base and look for guys trying to sneak in to blow them up or something like that. So for the terrorists trying to break into the base, these guys walk with dogs and sniff around to make sure there aren't tunnels being dug and stuff. People that work with those dogs, they have a real high voice. So they say, good girl, good boy. And that way one trainer can work with the dog and the dog recognizes what's a reinforcer, and then another trainer also uses that high voice when reinforcing. So all the guys working with the dogs take on that high voice. Good girl, good boy, high voice. The dog recognizes that's sort of different from normal speech. That's the reinforcing sound. It's like the click. All right, so that's a positive reinforcer. Let's talk about negative reinforcements and how they're different from punishment. So we talked about shaping behavior with primary reinforcements and secondary reinforcement. Let's distinguish negative reinforcement from punishment. A negative reinforcer is a stimulus that the animal will learn a response in order to turn it off or to avoid it. Now, electric shock might be either a punishment or a negative reinforcement, and those are different. A punishment is a stimulus that's presented contingent on the animal's behavior. So I'm going to tell you the sort of famous paradigm for negative reinforcement and also the paradigm for punishment, so you'll understand the difference. So this is the avoidance paradigm. We've got something like a ping pong table, table tennis kind of arrangement. We've got a net in 2 areas and a light on either side. And we have a rat. We got a rat here on one side. It looks like a mouse, doesn't it? Give him more of a ratty tail, maybe that'll help. All right, so we have a rat on one side, and now what we're going to do is turn on this light. And this table is electrified, so there's a grid of wires here on each side, and we're going to put a shock on this side. So the light comes on, and then a shock will come on. And the rat can learn, if it jumps, to avoid the shock. So the light signals that a shock is going to be delivered on this side. Light comes on, the rat jumps, it avoids it. Now you can turn this light on, the rat will jump and avoid it. And this is called the avoidance paradigm. And this is an example of negative reinforcement. So electric shock in this case is a stimulus that's working as a negative reinforcer in this paradigm. All right, it's electric shock. And the animal will learn a response in order to avoid it. Everybody clear on that? I'll come back and we'll talk about this paradigm in a bit. You can have 2 people, each of them with a button to push, you know, in the lab. Push the button, it turns on the light, the rat jumps. The person on the other side can push a button, it turns on that light, the rat jumps back. So they can kind of play ping pong, you know, 2 people, their buttons here with the rat jumping back and forth on there. Now let's talk about an example of a punishment experiment and tell you the basic result that has apparently not been understood by even Sheldon's character on the Big Bang. Maybe the authors of the Big Bang episode understood the distinction, but they decided to let Sheldon be confused. I don't know. Or maybe they didn't get it. So here's the experiment we're going to have. We take a group of rats. We train them all to press a bar. For food reinforcement. All right, so they've been shaped using the Skinner box that we had here in the paradigm I described below, where you click and feed the rat, and then eventually you get him closer and closer until he raises up on his hind legs, and then finally touches it, and finally has to push it. And now you got rats that are pressing the bar for food. So they press the bar, they get the food. All the rats have been trained to press the bar and get the food. All right? Now we randomly assign them to 2 conditions. One group gets extinction. Okay, they're in the extinction only group. What that means is we just turn off the food. They can press the bar. What was spilled back there?
Some lemonade.
What? Lemonade?
Yeah.
Something sticky. One of the problems, one of the reasons they have these signs in a lot of rooms, I don't see one here, is no food or drink in this area, is because we can't afford. That's how we get it so cheap for students here, right? The taxpayers are paying $12,000 and you guys are paying about $4,000 a year. We don't pay the professors very much. I can testify to that. You know, SC does it for $65,000 a year. Students pay $60,000 a year. The well